Hi, welcome back to the Personality Hacker Podcast. My name is Joel Mark Witt.
And I'm Antonia Dodge.
So today on the show, we want to talk about ESTPs and careers. Now, you're probably an ESTP watching, or you have an ESTP in your life, potentially. And so this idea of career will probably be very interesting to you. And this really came about through our Personality Life Path Mentorship program that this whole series came out of that, because we're recording for each personality type around careers. In that Life Path Mentorship, we're talking about the 8 areas or realities of life that correspond to all 8 of the Jungian cognitive functions. And we've been noticing, so each week we take one of those functions and we go around we talk about the archetypal energy in life and then how it relates to the person and the people in their life and our relationship to that function and how it impacts us in all of this. So that's what the program is. And many people that have joined this program going through this process with us are in the middle of a transition in their life. They're usually transitioning a relationship. There's a new life transition they're making. Maybe they're starting out on something, or they're changing something that has been for a while. And one of the key things that many people are talking about, bringing to the table, is this concept of careers. And they say, a lot of people are saying either they're starting off on a new career from university or into the world, young, but most of our students and pathfinders in that program are actually doing a reevaluation of their current career that they're in. And many are saying, I don't know if I want to keep doing what I've been doing. I'd like to make a change. I'm not sure what that change should look like. What are the principles I should be thinking about? So from those conversations, we realized, there's an opportunity to start talking to you as an ESTP. If you're thinking about career change or even starting out on a career, what are some things, some core principles to think about in deciding what career to pursue? Because if you go on the internet, there's a lot of advice, quote unquote, advice floating around out there. But how should we actually think about this in a mature and consistent, logical way?
Yeah. Well, and I think we want to come at it, or in this series, we have been coming at it, not just talking about the usual careers that ESTPs find themselves in.
Yeah.
But from the angle that our career has a massive influence on who we are. And the career that we choose all by itself is going to alter our relationship to our personality type. Mm-hmm. So our friend, Dr. Dario Nardi, who we've interviewed multiple times on the podcast, has over the last couple of years been doing quite a bit of research into subtypes. And we're not going to necessarily do a deep dive into that. If you want to listen to a full podcast on the subject of subtypes and what that looks like, there's it was like probably an hour to 90-minute conversation we had with them previously, and we can put the link around this podcast.
Yeah.
But we just want to take a piece of that and discuss how the 4 different ways that an ESTP personality type can show up or sort of evolve over time, how that is going to both impact the career that they choose and also how they will be impacted by the career they choose.
Yeah.
Because after the age of 25 in particular, there seems to be evidence that our personality types are hardwired into us, right? Like, we're probably born with our personality type preferences. But particularly after the age of 25, nurture is a big part of how our type shows up. Yeah. Meaning that, and that makes sense, like the thing we choose to do at least 40 hours a week is going to have a major impact on how our personality type is wiring itself and the kinds of things that it has to do. Like, what are the hoops it has to jump through? Maybe I chose a career that isn't normally considered the right career for an ESTP. How is that going to show up? Because I'm going to have to address that career in a very ESTP way, but I'm going to have to meet it in the middle. I'm going to have to take how I'm pre-wired and the demands of this job, and I'm going to have to sort of figure out how to make these 2 puzzle pieces fit.
Yeah.
And so because of that, the career path that we choose is really influential on what ends up becoming our subtype. So in this particular episode, we want to talk about some of the characteristics and qualities of those subtypes, those 4 different subtypes, and the kinds of careers they tend to choose, or possibly the careers that end up creating those subtypes, if that makes sense, right? Like, the reason why those subtypes might be matched with those careers is because the career itself helped create the subtype.
Yeah.
But I think it's a really interesting way of coming at it, because we can get unnecessarily limited. We can limit ourselves in the sort of the stereotypes around these types. And we don't want to do that. Like, if there's more options on the table, I would think that anybody would want to know what all those options are And what really suits us, not just depending upon our, our hardwired type preferences, but also what suits us based on how we can evolve and emerge over time.
And I think ESTPs are one of the types that tends to have stereotypes projected onto them more than others.
For sure.
There's probably a bunch of reasons for that we could talk about. We don't have time to unpack that. But I would say that the stereotypes of the ESTP are out there. You can find them anywhere on the internet. In fact, I came prepared, Antonia. I did a quick internet search, and I compiled a list of what the internet says are the top 10 career choices for ESTPs. So this is an aggregate, just general search list from the internet. Not, it's not like it's confirmed or anything. So just see if you're an ESTP.
Hours and hours and hours of research. It's just like, hey, what are the top 10 careers for ESTPs?
So if you were to do a search as an ESTP, these are probably some of the jobs you would come up with. And so see if you're an ESTP right now, see if any of these match what you're currently doing or maybe you've wanted to do or something like that. So number 1, entrepreneur or small business owner. Number 2, salesperson, sales manager. 3, police officer, detective. 4, military officer. 5, athlete coach. 6, emergency service worker, so like first responder, basically firefighter, paramedic, etc. 7, real estate agent or broker. 8, stockbroker or financial advisor. 9, marketing or advertising professional. And 10, event planner or coordinator. I thought that was a really interesting one. I mean, I think there's a lot of reasons for that, but that was an interesting. Number 10 was one I wouldn't have expected to be on that stereotypical list.
Yeah, it's not a bad list, but just like with all of the top 10 lists, I'm hearing things that would definitely be better suited to certain subtypes than others. Some subtypes wouldn't like some of those at all, and others would flourish in some of those careers. And there's one or two that isn't on that list at all that is the best for one of the subtypes, which we'll get to eventually.
I did find it interesting that a lot of those speak to the timing nature of ESTPs. Like a lot have to do with like quick responsiveness, paying attention to timing. Like for example, stock trading, it's all about timing and noticing the markets going up and down and really being attuned to in real time timing. So I thought that was a really interesting principle that I got from that list, just as a sense of what maybe an ESTP is attuned to.
Mm-hmm. And a more tactical nature in a lot of it too. Yeah,
absolutely.
It's less like strategy long-term and more something that requires you to, like you said, be in the moment and respond.
Yeah.
And I think that there's a component to that, right? Because of how ESTP's cognition is wired.
Yeah.
But I do think that there are certain flavors of ESTPs that don't mind a longer timeline. And should we launch into that?
Let's do it. So let's talk about these 4 subtypes of ESTP. This is the work of Dario Nardi. Now, he's borrowed some of the terms from Victor Glenko.
Right, in Socionics.
Socionics, with permission. He asked Victor for that. And some of also these combinations and the way they've framed out correspond to neurotransmitters. So the chemicals in our brains, testosterone, estrogen, serotonin, and dopamine, influence these 4 subtype patterns as well. It doesn't mean you're one of these types as an ESTP.
Right.
It just means this is the flavor of ESTP that you are.
Yeah, and it's good to know that these are flexible. Like these change over time. Some of these subtypes are more common in younger people and others more common in older people.
Yeah.
And it's in part because of, again, life choices, careers we've chosen, that sort of thing. But I think also there's a difference in pacing depending upon the lifestyle you've chosen as well. And so it's not all quick reflexes. But anyway.
Let's talk about the first.
Let's
jump into it. What's it called?
Okay, so the first ESTP type that we're going to talk about is the dominant ESTP. And this is the most assertive of all of the ESTP subtypes or flavors. The characteristics are ambitious, energetic, determined, decisive yet flexible, uncommon in their tactics to succeed. They have that bravura, right? There's like a bravery that comes along with this ESTP, or a seeming bravery. And in LeBaron's interaction styles, they have more of that in-charge style. So some of the qualities and characteristics that influence their career choices are things like they're really goal-focused, which isn't as not everybody I don't know if the stereotype around ESTPs is goal-focused as much as, like, say, ESTJs.
Yeah.
But they are goal-focused. They just have a more open-ended style about it. But there's that assertiveness, that desire to make things happen that very much creates that dominant energy, that sort of assertive energy to the outside world. But in true ESTP nature, they're also very in tune with body language. In fact, all the ESTP subtypes are going to have this as a characteristic, that being in tune with body language, vocal tonality. There's a real sort of tapping into how other people are showing up, but some subtypes are more in tune with that than others. And this ESTP subtype is in tune with that, particularly as it's trying to get things to happen effectively. They're fast logical thinkers. They can quickly categorize, deduce, define. That's all part of being an ESTP.
Yeah.
But there's a desire to have a wide reach. So it's not simply doing these things to play a smaller game. The dominant ESTP tends to want to play a bigger game, which creates a distinction between it and some of the other, or this subtype and some of the other flavors. So they do tend to be business owners, right? Or if they are working for a company, they're probably the head of a major organization, or it's not uncommon anyway. So they're either doing their own thing or they're at the top of a food chain, and that's the wider reach. It could also be something that's even international, right? Like they want as big a reach as possible because they have all that assertive energy. And while they're not really confined to any industry, they really want to focus on meeting practical human needs in as fun a way as possible. So things like aid delivery, live entertainment, health products and services, resort properties, talent promotion, anything that has that capacity to be really needs-oriented and focused on individuals, while at the same time having that flavor of a good time.
This is a fun comment, but I tend to think of James Bond, at least the original James Bond from the 1960s, as this type of ESTP initiative. That goal orientation could also be the mission that they're on, to go get the bad guy or to get the clue or something like that. It doesn't have to be a goal of like, I'm going to go build a building or start an organization. It could be a tactical goal. Mm-hmm. That's what comes up for me.
Yeah. So there's been lots of James Bonds, and there's been a lot of different.
I'm thinking the Sean Connery version.
The Sean Connery version, right, as opposed to the Daniel Craig version. Probably, actually.
Yeah.
Very much so, could be. There is a ability or an ability to bounce back in failure as well. That's that open-endedness.
Yeah.
If they don't get their goal accomplished, there's that sort of flexibility to just kind of try again. And so I don't know if that fits with your tactical James Bond dominant, but
I think he can flow with the emotions.
Yeah, that's what I'm going to say. It's kind of, he figures it out as he goes. So the thing that I think is really interesting about this style of ESTP, and maybe what sets it apart from, say, STJ types, which I suspect that dominant ESTPs probably mistype as STJs quite often because of that more assertive, scaled sort of goal orientation. I think the big difference is that how focused they are on high customer satisfaction, like that part of them that really cares, right? And I'm not trying to say that STJs don't care about customer satisfaction. I just know it's like one of the things that has to be woven into or baked into getting something done. But ESTPs are particularly focused on it in a way that I think really sets them apart from other types. And so because of that, they determine whether or not they have succeeded based on the response from their customer.
Feedback. Looking for feedback.
Yep, exactly. They're territorial, right? And so they have a tendency to make sure that what they have created isn't going to be poached. And one of the challenges that they experience is a lack of patience. So this subtype does really well in situations where they're entrepreneurs or really making big things happen. And as I mentioned, things that scale.
Yeah. Okay. So, and by the way, just a quick list. We're going to talk about the dominant, creative, normalizing, harmonizing subtypes of the ESTP. I forgot to give that list before we started. We started on the dominant. So what are some, do we cover the jobs that these might lend themselves to? We might have. I might have just forgotten.
Yeah, I talked about any industry, but right. They want to do they want to be meeting practical human needs with fun. One thing I didn't mention, though, is that part of their patience is actually a challenge with bureaucratic obstacles.
Yeah.
And so this is also something that sets them apart from maybe, say, their STJ cousins, is they really are super impatient when it comes to those kinds of things. And they might also have a temper, so they might blow up a lot. Yeah. But they have a lot of faith in gut instincts. And so they tend to get pretty far.
So let's also make a comment before we move on to the creative subtype about the cognitive wiring for the type geeks out there that are following along. How does this show up? Because there's a difference in how their two cognitive functions. The extroverted sensing sensation function is their driver or dominant, and their introverted thinking or accuracy co-pilot or auxiliary function. There's some nuance here when we talk about the functions.
Right. Thank you. Sorry, I forgot. We want to make this as accessible as possible. So if you are new to type and you just discovered you have ESTP preferences or just kind of trying to figure out how this all works, I want to make it very accessible so that people can hear, oh, there's this subtype that's a very assertive subtype.
Yeah.
Those of you who are type geeks, though, and want all the jargon and all the technical, so the both the dominant and auxiliary or first and second cognitive functions of extroverted sensing or what we call sensation and introverted thinking or what we call accuracy, both of them will have what Dario calls an analytic bent, which means that it has an assertive push out energy.
Yeah.
So each cognitive function can have a preference because all of it's input output, right? Like we push our will out to the world and we also receive things from the world. And the analytic version is the energy of us pushing out us onto the world.
Asserting.
Asserting, exactly. And then there's a holistic version, which is us more absorbing from the outside world and figuring out what to do with that. And for the dominant subtypes, both of those functions are analytic. They both assert energy out, which of course is what makes them dominant.
That's fantastic. Okay, thank you so much for that. And also the neurochemical involved here, the majority or the the most sought after neurochemical would be testosterone for this subtype.
Yeah, there's an association with the dominant subtype and the neurotransmitter of testosterone.
Yeah, okay. So let's talk about the creative subtype of ESTP.
So these ESTPs have a lot less aggression in the world. They're a little bit more, the creative subtype tends to be more common amongst younger ESTPs. And I have a feeling that this is what a lot of people think of when they think of ESTPs, is the creative subtype. This is more of an active, charming, flexible, fun-loving, risk-seeking, sort of all over the place ESTP.
Maybe this is more my James Bond character.
Yeah, possibly. We're going to try to figure out James Bond, all right? That's the whole point of this podcast. Where does James Bond fit in his subtype? There's a love of adventure and bringing other people into the adventure.
Yeah.
So they don't have as many options in career, right? Because they're not as career-oriented. They're not as focused on goals. They're not as focused on scale. And so there's a little harder, it's a little more difficult for these ESTPs to really, find the place where they're supposed to land. So some of the characteristics that really influence them is, of course, they are also tuned into body language, facial expressions, vocal tonality, and they are really tapped into what people want. Like they have a even more keen sense of this than the dominant subtype. And so they can be very charming, right? They're charming, playful. They can sometimes be misleading, right? Depending on if they're using their talents for good or for evil. They are really honed in and tuned into what's going on around them, and they're very fast at analyzing it.
When you say they know what people want, they're observing the needs of the people and the desires they have. They're not necessarily tracking motivations of people. When you say they know what they want, right?
Right. Well, they're reading tons of clues in body language of others. And
Gotcha.
So what they're more tuned into is, not their intentions and motivations, but their desires and how they're going to react to things.
Almost like what they're attracted toward, like
Yes.
drawn toward. Mm-hmm. They're watching for that.
Exactly. Right. Exactly. And so they can create really, especially if they're visual thinkers, really striking presentations. They can create things that are really beautiful, that are attractive to people because they're tuned into, like, oh, a person's going to like that. Oh, they're not going to like that,
Yeah.
right? And how they're going to respond to those things. So they have a real eye for beauty and style, right? And because of that, they tend to be attracted, unsurprisingly, to the arts, right? There's that ESTP desire to please others, right? To have something that's very pleasant. And they do that a lot through interaction. Right. So it's less like, oh, I made this thing, the world will respond to it how it wants to. They're very tuned into the feedback that they get from the world. And so interacting and moving around a lot is important to them to be able to hone whatever skill or craft that they're that they're trying to create,
Yeah.
because they need a lot of variety of people to give them a lot of variety of feedback, to let them know, because that's how they know what people want, is that they're directly engaging and interacting with them. They're not just assuming. So things like the arts, as I mentioned, but also consulting, public speaking, traveling for sales, right? Entertainment, marketing, politics, even psychology. These are all things that are going to attract this creative subtype.
Yeah, so careers for this subtype sound like they're very platform focused, meaning that like a traveling salesperson travels around, there's a platform. In other words, there's a company they might be associated with, but they're very independent when they're out on the road, quote unquote. Somebody that's maybe a YouTube creator, the platform of YouTube enables them to be a creative artist. Or maybe there's a musician who gets on a stage, a literal platform, and performs for people. Probably less likely to go to a 9-to-5 job, this subtype. This subtype is probably going to be an independent contractor of sorts that works on top of another platform or ties themselves into a larger federated group of some sort.
Yeah, actually, Dario has names for all of the subtypes.
Yeah.
And for this one, he calls it the social influencer.
There you go.
Yeah. And a part of that is because, again, this tends to be more common for younger ESTPs. But this is also a style that has more boldness. It courts danger. And it's really tapped into fun and play. And it tends to not be great at, fulfilling commitments and obligations.
Yeah.
Right? There's like kind of there's a joie de vivre about this ESTP subtype, and sort of tuned into, the muses and more access actually to intuition than some of the other, at least the dominant subtype. And we'll talk about the normalizing in just a moment, but this is a more tapped into its intuition ESTP. And, there are some ESTPs that are like really into taking psychedelics. It's not uncommon for the creative subtype ESTP to sort of be on that path.
I have one in mind right now that fits all of that description. They even look like a rock star.
Right.
Okay, so we talked about the dominant, that's the creative, and the creative's association with neurotransmitters is dopamine. That's the draw for them.
Right, exactly. And for the type geeks out there that want all the technical jargon, so the dominant function of extroverted sensing or sensation is going to have an analytic bent. So it's going to have a push-out energy, the perceiving function will. And the judging function of introverted thinking, or what we call accuracy, this is going to be more holistic. This is more receptive. And that's one of the reasons when the judging function is more open-ended and flexible, it's more receiving as opposed to pushing out. It has less sort of should statements about the world, and it's a little less tapped into, definitive core principles. And so because of that, there's a very open-ended nature to this style of ESTPs. Like their perceiving function, right, extroverted sensing, that's the thing that they're trying to push out to the world.
Yeah.
But they're more open-ended about how things should be set up and their judging function, and that's what makes them appear, especially when young, a little less responsible.
All right, so we've talked about dominant creative, we've got normalizing and harmonizing left. Let's talk about normalizing next.
Okay, so this is basically the exact opposite of the creative subtype. And this is an ESTP that is not one that courts danger and not one that is fly by the seat of their pants and tuned into all this, stuff. This is actually an ESTP that's more analytic, conventional, disciplined, organized, right? They're the most responsible of the 4 subtypes of ESTP. And so they're going to look more tame. Yeah. They're going to have more endurance as a person. They're going to be a little bit more focused on details and facts. And in Linda Barron's vernacular, they're going to have more of a chart the course style. So in terms of career, what would influence them is that they're more tuned into speaking and listening to word content. So the other 2 ESTP types are more visually looking for feedback cues from other people, like reading their body language, facial expressions, vocal tonality. This is more listening for specific words.
So if the other 2 are more about demonstration, this is more about articulation. This ESTP here.
Exactly. Mental planning and logic, right? Identifying and labeling. They remember a lot of sensory, tactical, and factual details that are relevant to their work. So they're going to do much better than especially their creative counterpart. They're going to do much better in school. They're going to do a lot better in the workplace. They are going to be more conventional in a 9-to-5 day job. And they are less likely to need that platform thinking, right? They can also, they can also be entrepreneurs, right? They can work for themselves, but not the scale that the dominant subtype is looking for. They're more likely to be maybe a solopreneur, right? Somebody who's just sort of doing their own gig or working for a larger organization. They are good at putting presentations together, packaging things. They're really good at designing products. As opposed to having that more creative bent, this is less about designing something new and more about calibrating.
Yeah.
They look for leverage points. They're looking for things that can be done better. They're more precision thinkers, right? With all those facts and figures in their mind. So they're going to find like the best way to do something. And that's more of a supportive role, right?
Yeah.
Is to calibrate what's already been, or what is already being done.
Yeah. Okay. So, and also their neurotransmitter would be serotonin. Serotonin is the chemical of choice for the normalizing subtype.
Exactly. And so they, like their other ESTP subtype brethren, are pretty flexible. They can be almost in any industry. And so there's not like a laundry list of careers that they can be in because they can kind of do anything, honestly. But this is going to be, again, more about, anything that allows them to ameliorate a product, anything that allows them to do better. And because they're more tapped into language, then in their area of expertise, they can actually become very good teachers, right? So an ESTP that is maybe a high school teacher is more likely to be a normalizing subtype.
Yeah.
Or one that's creating portfolio packages, to present is going to be more likely to be a normalizing ESTP.
And this would make sense for the type geeks out there. The cognitive function of extroverted sensing or sensation, this function in this subtype is holistic. It's more diffused. And the analytic or the push out function is going to be the introverted thinking or accuracy co-pilot auxiliary.
Right.
And that makes sense because there's more judgment, there's more distinction making, which requires you to pay more attention to language being used. The words people use show you what mental processes, or at least how they're thinking about things. And so this is a focus for this subtype, to watch the language, how are people communicating, all of this kind of stuff.
Yeah, our judging function, in this case, introverted thinking, is our should statements about the world. And it's when it's analytic, when it's push out, it's less flexible. It has more certainty about how something should happen. And then
you said you're not an ESTP, just to make sure I'm clear on that.
I'm not. I'm an ENTP.
You share the same
I do.
co-pilot auxiliary.
Yeah. Well, but it actually works the same for all the types. If we're talking about a judging function, it doesn't matter what personality type you are, the judging function is the part of you that goes, oh, the world should be this way.
Yeah.
And so for us, all humans, when we have an analytic or more assertive judging function, it means that we have more opinions on how things should be done, right? And we stick to those a little bit more. Whereas when our perceiving function, or in this case, an ESTP's perceiving function of extroverted sensing, or what we call sensation, is holistic, it's a little bit more open-ended. And this is what makes them less devil may care, right? As opposed to asserting that energy of being in the action and fast timing and bold action. This is the function that's a little more sort of muted.
Yeah.
It's more receiving. What is the world telling me? It's more like looking at details and remembering information than it is about like, oh, I want to take a specific action. And due to that, these ESTPs tend to be a lot less talkative. Even though they're more tuned into language, they are less assertive with their personalities. And so they tend to be a lot less talkative, a little quieter, and they might also mistype as STJ types.
And so this is probably the subtype that could make it in a traditional 9-to-5 office environment, traditional role, middle management. You might, if you identify with this, that might be the career path for you as an ESTP.
Yeah, exactly.
So let's talk about our fourth and final harmonizing ESTP subtype. So we've talked about the dominant, the creative, the normalizing. Now let's talk about the harmonizing. What does this subtype of ESTP look like?
So this is the least common style or subtype of ESTPs. In fact, this ESTP probably doesn't even know they're an ESTP. They probably mistyped as possibly an intuitive, or even maybe an intuitive judger, possibly a feeler.
Wow.
This is a ESTP that is a lot more toned down, and Dario says that they're more common in older age. Right? Again, we are not stuck in a subtype. our lives influence our subtype. And, arguably one of the things we want to do is be able to be flexible enough to move in and out of all of these.
Oh, yeah.
So the harmonizing subtype is usually seen, not always, but usually seen in an older version of an ESTP. The characteristics are that they're highly attentive to other people's behavior, very caring, deeply insightful while still remaining practical, and relatively patient for this type. ESTPs are not usually known to be patient. This is the most patient of the ESTPs. And they are more attracted to things like mentorship. All right, that's what they're more focused, and you can see that why it would be an older ESTP, because they've lived their life, they've done their devil may care stuff, they've had their, the younger, more bold, courageous time period, and now they're a little bit more chill vibe and relaxed. Doesn't mean that you can't be a younger harmonizing ESTP, but it's just more common when they get older. And in Lindenbaron's interaction styles, this is more of like a behind the scenes vibe. So their brains work in really complex ways, more complex than the other subtypes. In fact, that's usually what a harmonizing subtype means, is that there's a lot of very interesting, complex, sort of diamond-shaped mental patterns or wiring where, depending upon your type, it may or may not communicate with each other. So you might be highly specialized for certain types when you're harmonizing, or you might just be kind of a complex thinker with some of these specialties interacting with each other.
Complex doesn't mean better or worse.
Right.
It just means complex.
Yeah, and it's usually because a person has specialized in multiple different arenas. And so the complexity is that it's complex wiring, not complex thought. So it doesn't really have to do with intelligence. It just has to do with like how the brain scan picks up the patterns. Yeah. Thank you for creating that distinction. Anyway, the point of that is they are their networks are complex, and so they tend to be specialists that don't really have a capacity to work outside of their specialties or gain less ability to be flexible. And particularly this shows up socially. So while they might be really complex thinkers in the way of that they're highly intelligent in the things that they have mastered, one thing that they detether from is social expectations. So they show up a little weird, right? Or not weird, but like more eccentric, right? Yeah. They're like an eccentric ESTP that has their own way of handling things and isn't really tuned in as much to socially expected skills, which is different than like, say, other ESTPs like the dominant or the creative or even the normalizing that are really focused in on how people are experiencing them, right? What does this person want? What do they need? How can I show up and give them what they want? This ESTP doesn't care as much.
So maybe this ESTP is a little less aware or tuned in to all the nuances. A little, maybe naive, we could say. A little bit gullible, a little bit naive. Not because they're dumb, but because their brain's just not focusing on those things.
Well, possibly if they're a young version of this, but I suspect that the reason why this is more common in older ESTPs is that they just have gotten over it.
Gotcha.
They just don't care as much. And they've given themselves permission to be a little bit more idiosyncratic.
Yeah. Not worry what the crowd thinks.
Right. And exactly. So because of that, though, when it comes to career choice, they have more of a knack with working one-on-one with people, right? They're not as scaled as like the dominants. They're not needing that constant feedback like the creative would. They're not as sort of plugged into institutions as maybe the normalizing would. They're more sort of subtle. There's like a subtlety to these ESTPs that prefers the one-on-one interaction and particularly live and in person.
Yeah.
Like that's really important, is not just one-on-one, but live and in-person experiences. And they have a capacity to key in on someone and adjust their own language and behavior to be able to energetically guide a situation. So they're tuned into a person and they're sensitive to that individual, not like to how a group of people are going to respond, but how that person is responding to them, and then just sort of subtly guide them in a certain direction, which is a pretty subtle skill, actually. So because of that, this makes them very good actors, right? Particularly good actors, counselors, diplomats, high-end people, right? Not somebody who is like, just like your general salesperson, but somebody who's like selling something that's really expensive, right? And needs a lot of sort of understanding and education and teaching, but at the same time guiding to, to the results. They're really good poker players and they can even be like shamans or into psychology. They can make really good therapists or psychologists. And they oftentimes have a multicultural background. They're not sort of locked in. And because of that, because it's common for them to have traveled a bit or maybe even, have like 2 different countries that they call home or whatever, then they have a higher capacity to perspective shift than some of their other subtypes.
So if I was an ESTP listening right now, I'm like, I want to be that. That sounds way more awesome than all the others. Like that, but
Really?
maybe that's how I'm wired. I don't know. It just sounds like they have capacity to think deeply and creatively and meet people where they're at and weave together this amazing narrative and see perspectives and have a lot of intuition. Like, I mean, maybe I'm coming from I'm overvaluing my perspective, but that sounds like the best one of all 4 of them. I don't think we're giving any hierarchy to this.
Yeah.
Like if you're an ESTP listening, I think there's value in all 4 of these. And the other thing to remember is you're not locked into one of them. They're flexible.
Yeah.
And they can change and shift over time. This isn't your type. This is an expression of your type. I just want to briefly mention also estrogen is the chemical, the neurochemical. Am I saying is neurochemical the tech? Because ESTPs are listening. I got to make sure I nail this correctly.
I just think most people call them neurotransmitters.
Neurotransmitters.
Yeah.
Estrogen is the one desired by this subtype.
Well, it's an association and relationship to it. Yeah.
Absolutely. And let's talk about, for type geeks, the wiring of the cognitive wiring too.
Right. So both of the functions, the judging and perceiving, again, extroverted sensing, introverted thinking, both of them are holistic, receptive. And that's what makes this a more chill vibe ESTP. So they are not asserting themselves. And this is why, like, the dominant, which is the most assertive, that is like, I'm going to blast my energy out to the world and I want to scale as much as possible. So I'm either like going to just start my own company or I'm going to be at the top of somebody else's, or like, it's very ambitious.
Yeah.
This is the opposite. This is receptive energy and reacting and responding to receptive energy or with receptive energy. So it tends to be more like way, way, way descaled, one-on-one interactions, guiding a situation. You definitely, I think, are showing your bias by saying this is the coolest sounding one because each one of them comes with costs and benefits.
Yeah.
Right? The dominant comes with the benefit of having a lot of, leaving an imprint on the world, having a lot of impact. Usually they're in the best financial situation, right? But they're impatient, right? And can have emotional blowups. The harmonizing ESTP, this is more chill vibe. This is more intuitive. This is a little bit more, sort of capable of, guiding a person on an experience, more tapped into philosophy, spirituality, and shamanism, perhaps. But they're considered eccentric, right? Yeah. And so you have to deal with the fact that you're a little bit of a weirdo, which if you're an older ESTP, you're probably fine with. And
my guess is the harmonizing mistypes as introvert and intuitive more than the other 3.
Yeah, probably feeler as well.
Feeler, intuitive, introvert. Like they might misread on an assessment of sorts. Because again, stereotypically, they certainly don't match the stereotypes on the internet for ESTPs. So again, these are expressions of the ESTP personality. And you might express one of these in one context and something else in a different context. And just like Antonia mentioned at the beginning, the career you choose might be based on your subtype, but also the career you choose trains you into a subtype.
Right.
So often the career we choose starts to push us and wire us to start expressing more like the specific subtype that lends itself to that career choice.
Yeah. And I don't think we've really talked about this in any of the other video or podcasts, but I watched my dad, or at least my dad who had ESTP preferences. I think he started out as a creative when he was young.
I was going to bring your dad up. This is perfect. Go.
Yeah, he started out because the stories he tells me of when he was young, he was like, the things he did.
And yeah.
I'm surprised he survived his teenage years, right?
Yeah.
The things he did were definitely not very safe. They were very devil-may-care, and he had a way with the ladies, even though he wasn't, he was not considered the most handsome man, but that did not matter at all for him. And my dad was born in like 1940, so we're talking about the 60s. But he's just this. He used to be a semi-professional sponsored roller skater at one point, right? And a chemistry major, and he just life was filled with joie de vivre, and he just did whatever he wanted to next. And then he went into a time period of, I think, becoming a dominant ESTP. And that was his career path. He was really aggressive marketer, and he was super good at knowing what people wanted and, figuring out lost leads for marketing. He became a C-level executive as a marketer. Scale, helped this company scale huge.
Yeah.
And then he went into another phase of his life where he dedicated himself to having a more sort of deeper religious side. And that's very much the normalizing ESTP. It's not uncommon for normalizing ESTPs to have a religious side to them. And that's the direction my dad went. And then he was very 9 to 5, and he was a really good teacher as as an elder in his church, and ended up doing lots of public speaking around that, but was a lot more muted than he had been when he had been the C-level marketer. I don't think he ever quite made it to harmonizing. I think that was the one subtype he didn't visit. But you could definitely see that transition, and I wonder if circumstances had been different and allowed him to, if he would have ended up, visiting that side of himself as well.
So then we can say the expression of your subtype as an ESTP is based on your context and also the timeline of your life. There might be a maturation process that taps you into different energies, holistic or analytic energies of your cognitive functions, that brings different parts of you out. Imagine the ESTP personality type is a song. Each of these subtypes is a performance of that song. It's a little bit of a different arrangement, a different performance of that song. You're still an ESTP. You still have the same cognition. You're still learning and absorbing information through extroverted sensing or sensation. You're still making your decisions through introverted thinking or accuracy. That's the best way that you go through the world. It's just, how do you express it? And that's what we're talking about today. And also these patterns, I didn't mention this at the very beginning as well, but these also came from the EEG scans that Dr. Nardi did. The reason why we have these for is he triangulated people's type when they came into his laboratory, connected to EEGs, and he'd watch the brain patterns show up in these 4 configurations, and that's how he determined the cognition and all that. We can't go into the math of that, but he talks about that as subtype.
Yeah. Each of the subtypes has a slightly different brain wiring phenomena that shows up. And and I think what's interesting, harkening back to my dad again, what's interesting is I don't know if he got into that subtype and then chose the career. I almost think it happened the opposite direction. I think he was naturally more of a creative subtype, or at least his upbringing allowed him to be. And then I think it was when he decided he was going to get serious about his career, I think that activated the more dominant energy.
Yeah.
And then when he decided he was going to be more religious, that activated the normalizing. So again, I think when you're seeking the right career for yourself, you're not just asking, well, what subtype am I and what should I be matching the career to? I mean, that's a piece of it. But you can also ask, what kind of person do I want to be? And match the career to the energy you want to pull on. Just for myself, I was raised to be a harmonizing ENTP type. And I've actually seen the limitations of that. Even though it's common for people to become harmonizing when they get older, you can have a context that encourages you to go straight there. And I'm seeing that that's actually limited me in some ways. And so I'm looking for opportunities that will bring out more of a creative side or possibly a normalizing side. And I eventually want to get to the dominant, because there's like a opposite polarity between, say, the dominant and the harmonizing. And there's an opposite polarity between the creative and the normalizing. And in order to be able to visit all of these subtypes, the theory goes is that you actually have to go adjacent. Right? I can't just go from harmonizing to dominant. I've actually got to go through either creative or through normalizing, which is an interesting concept, right? You can't just make fast changes automatically. You've got to kind of stair step it. So I think part of when a person is trying to find the right career path, it's not just what will I like, what helps me become the kind of person that I will like.
Yeah.
It's about me too, because it has an influence on who I am.
Yeah. Okay. So if you're an ESTP listening along, we actually want to hear from you at this point. You haven't had a third microphone, but we've been talking about the 4 ways that your personality type expresses. Does this resonate with you? Do you find yourself in one of the descriptions of these subtypes and you're like, oh, well, no wonder I don't fit the stereotypes online, or something else? Or you're like, oh, well, that makes so much more sense. I lean more toward this style of ESTP. Come over to personalityhacker.com directly below this episode. Leave a comment, ask a question, or more importantly, share your ESTP career story with us. Where are you at in your career's timeline? Are you just out of university or school and you're ready to start on your career? Have you just started a few years ago, so you're right in the middle of that, the first few years of your career path? Have you been doing something for a while and you're ready to make a change and you're maybe in the middle of that change, you're on the cusp of that change? Where are you in your career journey? We'd love to hear from you. Again, come over to personalityhacker.com and make your voice heard.
We'll also leave a link for Dario's book.
Yeah.
It's like he hasn't written, at the time of this recording, he hasn't written a full book on the on the theory, because I think he's still working on it. But he has created like a sub-book, like a booklet that I think has some great information. So we'll make sure to link to that booklet so you can get a little bit more information.
And of course, we talk about this in our ESTP owner's manual. Right. We talk about the 4 styles and we go more depth when we talk about how to use your ESTP personality type to navigate your world.
Yeah, you got it. All right. So if you enjoyed this podcast, you can subscribe to us on iTunes and various Android platforms. If you leave a rating and review on iTunes, it helps us out a lot. It helps me out a lot because I know somebody's listening. And I also thrive on feedback because I'm a very similar type to ESTPs. So as an ENTP, I also love to get as much feedback as possible. So head over to iTunes and leave a rating and review. The review is very important. You may be watching this on YouTube. That's because we now have a YouTube video podcast feature where you can look at Joel's lovely, lovely visage while I do the majority of the talking as usual. If you would like to subscribe, feel free to do so. You can like, subscribe, and hit the little bell that lets you know when a new episode is out. We have a book. It's called Personality Hacker. Why do you laugh
Just
and go, what?
Look at Joel's lovely visage. Is that what you said? While I do majority of the talking?
Isn't that what people do?
It's just funny how you said it. It's great.
You're the eye candy and I'm the content. Where was I at? Oh, yeah, we have a book. It's called Personality Hacker. You can get it in all major book retailers. And if you leave us a rating and review on Amazon or on Goodreads, that also helps us out a lot. And of course, if you're still trying to figure out your best fit type and this has completely confused you because you're like, what? There's different kinds of ESTPs? I had no idea. Well, if you'd like to at least get your journey started, you can head over to personalityhacker.com, take our online assessment, and at least begin the journey of discovering your best fit type.
Yeah. My name is Joel Mark Witt.
And I'm Antonia Dodge.
And we'll talk with you on the next Personality Hacker podcast. Hey, it's Joel from Personality Hacker. So a big reason people get into personality types is usually to improve their relationships with other people. And you can understand key differences between you and someone else when you understand how type works. So clearly, personality type is applied to relationships. But what about the relationship with yourself? Well, personality type can also help you navigate your career, or maybe an educational path that you need to follow, or other opportunities that present themselves, and it helps you know which are the right choice for you. And ultimately, personality is the key to unlocking identity-level worldview and life purpose. It all starts with getting the owner's manual for your personality type. In this owner's manual, we cover the basics of your personality. And then we dive a layer deeper to connect your personality to your relationships, your career, your worldview, and identity. Because we believe it's your life, and it should be designed for your personality. So start your owner's manual journey at personalityhacker.com. When you access your owner's manual, I recommend focusing on the ideal day exercise first. Because when you start crafting your ideal day, you're being mindful about the type of lifestyle that you want. So designing a life around how you're naturally wired makes sense, and you can finally stop fighting yourself. So come discover and develop your unique personality at personalityhacker.com.